So I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We're the Futurist Panel, by the way, so look for a lot of sort of dreamy wisdom on this panel. Let's start with Jen here. Can you introduce yourself, Jen?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jen McLean. I am the head of worldwide business development for AWS Game Tech for small and mid-sized studios. I've been in game development and technology in some way, shape, or form for more than 25 years. And I don't know that anyone has ever accused me of providing dreamy wisdom before, but I'll do my best.
There you go.
Okay. For those of you with a short memory, I'm the evil twin of the guy that was just up. From Dell, director of virtualization, virtual reality. Been in the industry for a very long time, and looking forward to speaking up here today.
Hi, my name is Jeff Shee. I'm the lead product manager for artificial intelligence at Unity. Most of my background is in the AI and machine learning research side. And obviously, at Unity, we focus a lot on gaming, AR, VR.
I'm Bebo White. I'm emeritus at the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory at Stanford, which is the national lab for high energy physics and basic energy science. And I'm a computational physicist. What do I know about it?
And Bill?
Bill Raybach. I head developer relationships for a company called Blade Group that produces the Shadow PC streaming service. I go all the way back to the first trade show I ever worked at was Summer CES 1978, demoing Star Raiders on Atari 800, and then worked for Atari and Sony Computer Entertainment and NVIDIA for 15 years between then and now. So, been around the block a little bit.
All right. So I've been writing about games for 23 years and been at VentureBeat for about 11 years, and it's just been amazing to see all the changes that have happened. I also run this GamesBeat conference once a year. We're going to do that in April in Los Angeles next year. I think what we'll start with is, what dreamy thing do you want computing to accomplish for you? And then we're going to get to a little later, maybe the next question, like what you need to get there, or how you might actually shoot that dream down yourself, maybe. But let's start with Bill on that side with this first question. Like, what's the thing that you really want computing to do for you?
I would say that the biggest win that we could see in the industry in the next, hopefully 5 to 10 years, maybe 15, is that interactive entertainment finally gets to the point that it's truly ubiquitous. We were having a conversation a little bit ago about a lot of people in the room and people that came up on stage during the course of the day saying that they're not gamers. Right, which is still weird in this day and age that there's a stigma associated with being a gamer. It'd be like going to the VSDA show, the video, regular linear content show, and people saying, "Oh, hey, I don't watch movies," that interactive entertainment at a good quality would be democratized to the point that it becomes very accessible to everybody, so that it isn't just people that can afford $2,000, $3,000 PCs that are talking about ray tracing and that kind of stuff, and really just truly what we talk about today as being the cutting edge becoming more commonplace. I think is the thing that will serve us all better, both from an education standpoint as well as from an overall entertainment perspective.
And Bebo, why don't you go?
I'm going to, respond a little bit to what you said about gaming. And when Neil first talked to me about coming to this, that was my response. What do I know about gaming? But one thing I certainly learned today is the way in which the gaming ecosystem, as it were, really does encompass a lot more issues, a lot more fundamental issues than simply the entertainment quality as well. But in terms of like my dreams, I'm going to agree with you in the senses that I look forward to truly ubiquitous systems. But one of my bigger dreams too is basically thinking about computing as a utility, just like the lights or the water or anything of that nature, a utility that basically becomes a human right and is available to everyone.
I think Amazon has created that, except they charge for it, all right?
That's not true. We have a free tier.
Okay. Jeff.
Yeah, I think for me, the intersection of AI systems and human interaction in the space of education and continuous learning. I think, if you think about the future, where I think there's a lot of untapped potential in like our human abilities that can really be unlocked with having a lot of AI systems sort of unlocking that ability for us. So I'm very excited about the future where our own potential is really unlocked by AI, and of course that means more compute, better designs, more algorithms, better systems. That's really what excites me, is that when I become like much older, that hopefully I'll be a much more improved and much better version of myself. And so that's what gives me.
My age? Is that what you mean?
No, absolutely not in that way. Yeah. But, yeah.
You want to hack yourself, I guess, Jeff?
Yeah, exactly. Something like that. Yeah.
All right.
So for me, it's really about, well, first off, I want to thank like the media and entertainment industry, right, for where they've actually taken the technology and really pursued that perfection and really pushed the envelope all the way. Because what I'm seeing it do is have a real impact in healthcare. Right, so we deal a lot in the industry with people who are now using VR and AR inside of training surgeons, treatment of PTSD, autism, things of that, giving people an awareness of dementia or other physical diseases inside of that. And all of this is brought about by all the work that's been done in pursuit of getting people out of the house and entertaining them, whether it be through film, digital techniques there, whether it be through creation of VR pieces, and taking all of that and actually putting it into a package which makes it good for humankind. Right? Gamification is a big thing. One of the examples is doing your exercises. Right? People go for physiotherapy and they get home and you've got to do this repetitive movement 15, 20 times in the evening before you go to bed. It's like, no, well, I'll just skip tonight, can't do it. You put a headset on and you're playing a game where you actually do that and you don't actually know you're doing it, then that can only be a good thing. So I'm looking forward to that becoming more the norm.
Mm-hmm. And Jen?
Yeah, I have a similar goal for how we use computing. I would love to see us use computing to build emotional connections with other people. I'd love for us to use computing to help address some of the fundamental inequalities that we are struggling with globally. And fundamentally, I think we should be using computing to make the world a better place, and we shouldn't hold ourselves to any lesser yardstick.
Mm-hmm. So it is interesting that nobody really sort of said, I just want to have all the technology come as fast as it can into society and to just make it happen without any regard to whatever impact it has, I guess. Is that fair to say? You're not necessarily all
Like nobody said,
sane.
I want holodecks?
Yeah.
Well, I think a couple of people have made the comment that just because we can do it, should we do it? In terms of the capabilities that we have. Mm-hmm. And which one of those should be the driving factor for future computing? Mm-hmm. Simply the growth of the technology or our ability to use it in a productive way. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also interesting to think that computing actually has a cost. It has a physical, tangible cost in terms of energy consumption. Mm-hmm. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, is very aware of climate change. So again, is this, when we think about resources, is using computing in a certain way the best way to use a resource? We've had the luxury of not having to think about that, and there are many companies, including Amazon, who are making a commitment to renewable energy for computing. But we also, I think, have to move past the idea that, oh, computing is free, because actually it's really not.
Now, we'll switch it up a little bit and ask you maybe about some of the how here, like how you would get to some of the things you want. Maybe in the context of the client or the cloud, right? Bill, you're at a cloud gaming company. I'm assuming that you're going to say cloud is going to be very important to how you get to where you want entertainment to go, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, the main rewind a little bit to when I was at NVIDIA. I was at NVIDIA during the days when NVIDIA originally made GeForce Grid and what became GeForce now, and NVIDIA's streaming service. And I had a lot of internal arguments when I was there because I was running developer relations at NVIDIA and trying to figure out how cloud computing and cloud gaming for NVIDIA would fit into the big picture. And the challenge that I presented to both Jensen as well as the GeForce Grid team was, well, okay, this whole notion of containerized gaming and cloud gaming and all that was really kind of interesting, but the problem with it was that it was really all about, okay, we're gonna offer this selection of games that was very console-esque, and I said, no matter how good the developer relations group at NVIDIA is even if you select what we think is the most brilliant selection of 100 games, if you turn around and there's a user out there that says, oh, but I want to play Space Engineers, and Space Engineers is not one of the 100 games that you have available, that poor guy still has to turn around and go buy a PC to be able to play Space Engineers, which means that you failed, right? Because of game number 101. And the thing that attracted me to Shadow is the notion of really, truly democratized access to high-performance gaming hardware, which was, at the time of GTX 1080, and we've just started deploying RTX 2080s so that you can do ray tracing. But here in the cloud is a really, really great performance PC that will get upgraded on a regular basis for $15 to $30 a month or so. And giving users access to that kind of hardware, because it's in the cloud, it is really easier. It's easier to control energy and energy costs and cooling and things like that. But for Shadow, the really, really important thing, though, is not taking away, it's not democratized if you've taken away choice from the user. But because it is a full Windows 10 PC, and they can install any game they want from Steam, from the Epic Store, from Good Old Games, they can develop their own Unity games on Shadow, and it all just works just like a local PC. That is kind of the vision for what needs to happen in the future. And the bottom line is there's nobody in the world that buys a GTX 1060 or a GTX 1070 GPU because they want to. They do it because they're going to settle for it because of price. And the idea of giving access to mass users and to education and to schools and things like that, because the PCs themselves are in the cloud, I think is a great futurist way of approaching the technology.
So I'm going to guess that the whole panel likes this idea of using computing for various kinds of democratization, like Mr. Unity there. Democratization of game development is your model, right?
It actually was the model, but it still floats around internally, absolutely.
Okay. So, but democratization, it's not really a function of the most computing power you can have, right? What is democratization how is it important as far as what you guys actually want to see happen?
Can I take that as a hardware manufacturer?
Yeah.
So democratization is great. Because it's giving access to all, as has been said. I mean, the more people that can use it, the more people that can experience it, then it's great. There was a big thing when we started to virtualize servers way back when, and people were going, we can't virtualize servers because server sales will dry up, people only buy one, and then they're not going to buy the 10 that they would have otherwise, for just pick a number out the air. But the world's selling more servers now than they ever did in the past because more people realized the benefits of it. They realized that it was actually game-changing, and then it proliferated. In much the same way now, I think the days of democratization is really going to get more eyeballs on the IP, right, that people wouldn't have actually otherwise gone and bought or wouldn't have invested in. And they're actually going to see that, they're going to play that, then they're going to find, well, okay, I'm getting more and more professional, I want to go into esports, I want to do anything else, where latency now becomes important, because no matter what you do with a remote situation, you've still got the speed of light that comes into it. You can compress or whatever else, but if you're not co-located in the same place as your data and your compute, then you're going to have an increased latency time or a ping time or whatever you want to call it. Right? So consequently, people will then go and say, well, I now need my own hardware or I need to get closer to it. So what I see is actually going to, I mean, somebody was saying earlier that not everybody's a gamer. I actually think that's going to get less and less because you're going to embrace the casual gamers. You're going to get the people on a subscription model who wouldn't have bought hardware, and then that's going to be great for the industry as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a reaction here on democratization?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously you see things like cloud streaming for games. Stadia is like a great example. Xbox and PlayStation both announced these kind of services. But I mean, games are, and I think even just any kind of like app development is very tricky to always have pure one or the other. Games especially, games have FPS requirements, physics, rendering, all these components. Where I think it's if it's not, if you have 5G co-located, it's a very hard experience to pull off. However, that I think that is the trend, right? I think the trend is that you're going to start to see devices that are just basically clients, and you're starting to see a lot more stuff served up from a cloud infrastructure perspective. That's definitely the trend. And I think as things like 5G, the more the underlying platforms get better, you'll just see that more proliferate in the app development side. And you're already starting to see that in gaming, and you'll start to see that probably with all kinds of mobile app development.
Yeah, but what I really liked about your answer is the recognition that I believe every person on the planet should love playing games, but they're not going to love playing every game, right? Yep. There is no way that my 70-year-old aunt who spends hours each day playing mobile games is going to enjoy a session of Dark Souls 3. It ain't going to happen. So I think one of the things that we have to be conscious of is when we think about democratization of any type of technology service, are we creating a service that is accessible and approachable to consumers? Are we giving them a good experience? Are we giving them joy and entertainment and emotional connection and emotional resonance? Because a lot of the experiences that we create, whether they are games or other types of technology, are not accessible to the mass market. And so I think one of our challenges when we think about democratization, which I'm sure is used in every investor pitch ever and is a great buzzword, is are we really truly solving customer problems? Mm-hmm. Are we really and truly making a great customer experience? Are we making somebody's life better? And I think that as an industry, we have a ways to go there.
Interesting. So Bebo was one of the first webmasters, or the first webmaster in the United States, right? Yeah. And you brought up in our sort of pre-call here that you're interested in the decentralized web, and I wonder why that is, and whether you see sort of computing technologies like decentralization actually as being the thing that's going to get you there.
I will. But
why is that important to you?
Can I first make a comment as far as the client versus cloud question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm definitely in favor of cloud in that sense, because I'm glad that in the course of the morning, people did bring up the notion about the digital divide. And I'm a firm believer, and also people brought up the idea about leveraging the capability of the clients that you have. I'm a firm believer in the concept of bring your own device. and basically then allowing people to not have a diminished access to resources, but actually then just be able to utilize and access those resources, in a way that's most familiar to them. That's part of democratization, I think, in that case.
If you want to use a smartphone,
If you want to use a smartphone, I mean, who was it that was dissing flip phones this morning? I don't know. But anyway, the idea too, if that's what you have, and for one reason or another, or if that's what you prefer for one reason or another, you shouldn't be made to feel like a second-class citizen.
So
because of your
technology
unwillingness.
should evolve to the point where it doesn't matter what you're connecting with. You get access to the same resources everybody else can.
Yeah, just so long as you have access to the services that you want in that case. In terms of your question about the decentralized web, basically the idea there is allowing people, users, to sort of regain access to their own personal data, which unfortunately I think due to the rapid evolution of the web, they lost in some ways. Allowing them in some ways that not only having control over their data, but able to do such things as dictate, as it were, the use and the monetization of their data, those kinds of things. And I think there's a lot of decentralized or characteristics of decentralized systems that more closely support that. There's also, I think in this case, the web originally was basically a centralized system, and that's why we get 404s when something's not found. Wouldn't it be nice in a decentralized system never to get a 404? Because the data's there and you're not relying, as it were, on the presence or the absence, as it were, of a resource.
Does this spark anything?
And I can talk about that until you're...
I think blockchain is like a very good example of decentralized.
Absolutely, and Melissa and I are going to do that tomorrow. So yes, you're exactly right. But I think that's a different issue. I think blockchain is an example of a technology that could lead to a decentralized web. But I think you could certainly have all the characteristics of a decentralized web without the adoption of something like blockchain.
Yeah, but it is interesting that from a futurist standpoint, when you look at the panel here, AWS is the notion of accessibility of a server to anybody that needs one at any time and ease of bringing it up, right? 5 years, 10 years ago, if you had to be kind of in the know to know who the rack space guys were to be able to get a server up, right? Now, I think if you have an Amazon Prime account, you get AWS with it. No? Okay. But anyway, but bottom line is...
That's a great idea. I'm going to take that back to Seattle.
We have maybe a Twitch account, right?
But bottom line is AWS is access. Dell, going all the way back to the original Dell ads on the back cover of PC Magazine, was about accessibility of PCs to people. I mean, I used to order PCs from my company in Chicago from Michael Dell in his
garage.
No, in his dorm room.
Dorm room. That's
right. When it was PCs limited. Yeah. But the bottom line was the notion of Dell fundamentally was accessibility to building PCs so that you didn't have to be in the know, right? Unity was about accessibility of being able to be creative on games, right? So the bottom line is, and then God knows, the internet, right? Sure. Period, right? Just the accessibility to data, and I think that the summary is that using democratization is the trite word, but the bottom line is accessibility is what the future really is all about.
One of the things that I get really excited about in my role is services like SageMaker, which is kind of the easiest to use machine learning service that we offer running on AWS. Because what that means fundamentally is that for a 10-person game development shop, you can use machine learning to make your game better without having a PhD in data science or a PhD in artificial intelligence on your team. That's exactly the kind of accessibility that I think is kind of the next generation. It's not just access to the core physical resources or even the cloud, but then it becomes access to the services that are running on top of the cloud. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, Lex and Poly, the backbone of Alexa, is available to any AWS customer.
Sure.
And that is amazing when you think about being able to create, again, great customer experiences because you have access to an amount of technology that was literally unimaginable 10 years ago even.
So I want to give you a compliment in terms of AWS, which you might have been. I think there's also some social responsibility in there in the sense that, if someone has the crazy notion that they're going to do Bitcoin mining on AWS, they're in for a big surprise because it's not going to be a good return on investment. And I think Amazon makes that perfectly clear in terms of the limitations of, their infrastructures.
Yeah, we make our end user agreements clear and we expect all of our customers to abide by them.
Sure.
So there's this interesting theme of centralization and decentralization in computing technology, right? But there's also the same sort of tug of war that happens in politics, and the same happens in industries, right? If you centralize an industry too much, you wind up with antitrust cases, right? If you decentralize your politics, you get democracy. And it feels like all of these things are actually intertwined in some way, and that the funny thing is centralizing computing in a company like Amazon can actually decentralize an industry by giving indie game developers a chance to survive, right?
Well,
it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
Can I comment about that in terms of decentralization? I think we're not talking, for one thing, in terms about breaking up, as it were, the large, I hesitate to say monopolies. You're not talking about.
I think we agreed to say tech giants, didn't we?
The FANG guys.
Okay.
FAANG guys. Yeah. But basically, I think if nothing else, it's going to be to improve your relationship with them or to understand your contract with them in the sense of saying, like, for social media, they're not going to be able to use my personal data willy-nilly, but I am willing possibly to sell it to you if you want to use it, or something of that nature. So really having a greater understanding of the relationship between the entities, not really to totally shut them out. That's not what one of the goals, I think, of a decentralized web is.
Anybody else?
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But from a centralized, decentralized one, we've always been on a constant kick of iteration. Yeah, we were centralized with mainframes and green screens, then we were decentralized to the edge, then we went back again, and the time frames are getting shorter and shorter. I think John touched on that this morning. But where we are now is I haven't quite worked out whether we're centralized or decentralized. Because when we actually look at the cloud was, okay, everything's going to live out here. Now we get to 5G, and your data has to be co-located with the 5G antenna, because otherwise you do have added latency of accessing the data remotely. Now I've got to have copies of all my data, right, from that central source out at the edge, right, in the particular metro location or whatever location it is, so that I can access it quickly and immediately and get the response times I need. So is that centralizing my data decentralized, or what? I haven't quite got my head around that one yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger issue is really ownership of the data versus decentralized versus centralized. And I mean, like one of the big things that we do at Shadow is that every user has their 100% control We have, Shadow has no access to your copy of Windows, to any of the games that you have. It is 100% your little virtual machine that when you're logged in gets mounted to a piece of, to a GPU and a CPU, but then when it's shut down, it's encrypted and nobody has access to it, not even customer support. I mean, it's a very weird thing because for Shadow users, when they need customer support, you actually have to use Windows remote desktop out and around to get to and help them, right? But that's a really, really important tenet that even though the computing is centralized, the ownership of the Windows instance and the ownership of that data is sacred.
Yep.
And I think that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
Amazon AWS.
Yep.
You
Exactly.
have your AWS instance and it's your machine, and Jeff Bezos doesn't have any access to any of it at all, right?
Not at all. And we
I
provide
think-
encryption tools to make sure that our customers always retain control over their data.
Exactly. And I think that is where the mindset is, which puts it in a pretty good place.
And I think it has to be, right? If you are a cloud infrastructure provider, understanding that customers' data is always customers' data is absolutely core to running your business. And I think that where it becomes a more interesting case, interesting as in we need to talk a lot more about it as a society, is what Bibo mentioned earlier with how people are using our personal data. Because not every company is ethical about how they are using your personal data. They are certainly not transparent about how they are using your personal data. And even the advent of things like GDPR still means that your personal data is almost certainly being used in ways that you are not aware of, that you may object to, and that you may not feel is fair and reasonable compensation.
There's a lot of rabbit holes we could go down here, but I don't know if we should with our remaining time. Actually, does the audience have any questions that we've sort of triggered as a result of the conversation?
So there's a Futurist Panel, and so you guys have been painting a very rosy picture of the future. When you give this kind of power to the masses, with great power comes great responsibility. There's a lot of irresponsible people in the world. What, from your perspective, do you foresee as the most negative things that could happen with all this power, and what are you guys doing to try to overcome that?
One of the big things that I worry about, and Peter touched on this a little bit in his talk, is how we are empowering very bad behavior in multiplayer games. You can be a terrible person in a multiplayer game and face minimal consequences. And as a woman in games, I've seen what that means outside of the game experience and in real life. No one should ever experience death threats or rape threats or have their family threatened because they make video games. And yet we see that for game developers. That is not acceptable. And I think as an industry, we need to take a much harder stance on what we think is acceptable. Because fundamentally, what you allow in your community, what you allow in your game, sends an implicit message about what is allowed in your contact with other human beings.
I'll take the next one. So from my perspective, it's a case of checks and balances as we go through technology. I mean, you mentioned earlier about introducing technology as fast as you possibly can, right? I think due diligence needs to be done along the way because we don't know what we don't know, but the onus is on us to find out what we don't know to ensure that there's no longer term effects. Case in point would be with VR, for instance. We don't market to anybody under the age of 13. Right, so when I have account managers coming to me saying, we've got a great education thing, K through 12, whatever. I say, no, as long as K is, 8 and above, right, then we're hitting that 13-year-old and upwards. But we all need to be, as an industry, responsible for that because there could be psychological harm inside of there. We already know that VR can affect the mind because we're using it, as I said earlier, for PTSD and autism and whatever. It can also have negative effects as well, therefore, because for every positive, there's going to be a negative. We as an industry need to police that, make sure that everybody upholds that same standard, and make sure that we don't actually give ourselves problems in the future because of our reckless abandon to make a buck.
And I guess maybe I'll comment maybe from the, like, at least sort of our thoughts and like the AI side is, you know, it's just probably probably not the right crowd to say this, but I really think actually the government really needs to step in and create new kinds of policy, especially in the AI side. Because you see all the violations that happen, and I think a lot of it can be prevented with just better debates, better information for the government, better policy. You see, look at Cambridge Analytica, you look at all these like very, very negative AI uses or negative uses in machine learning, and you look around, there's really no policy that really sets standards for these things. So I think, first and foremost, I think that's really the role of the government to actually, you know, have these debates and have better policy. Because I think asking, you know, a lot of companies to just sort of self-police that, I think, you know, it's a little bit unknown if that'll really pan out, if that's the right solution. So that's sort of my 2 cents, is that there needs to be a little bit tighter coupling with government and big businesses doing this stuff.
In terms of bad behavior, this is, I think, another example of those cases where, you know, you're not talking about technology. I'm not sure that, you know, people want to have computer scientists develop a code of ethics for them, or something of that nature. I have trust in the community, as it were, to be self-governing. In terms of governing behavior, that's the way that perhaps you suggest. Unfortunately, I see that as being, you know, one more step toward the road of censorship, as it were. I think people can make their own choices, and I can give you an example of that if I can quickly. A number of you are probably familiar with the Internet Archive, whose goal basically is to archive all content on the web. But they have consciously chosen not to archive porn, not to archive hate sites or anything of that nature. They have taken that on their own initiative to do that. So I think, once again, it's got to be a decision that cannot actually have further consequences, for example, to support arguments for censorship or anything of that nature. I believe in government regulations, but you know, it's a slippery slope that does not have a technical solution in that case.
That's a fair point. I think it's just that it's more, I guess, the debate of policy for these kind of things, not necessarily you know, the government needs to step in and do this. Because I think a lot of these, if you look at the terms of service for things like what you can post on Twitter and these, you know, all these like platforms, yeah, I mean, a lot of it's because there's a lot of this filth going on, and the companies recognize need to fix that. But you know, where is that the line between that and like something else, right? And that's I think asking the technology companies to always self-police, I think, is a lot. Well, without any government sort of partnership.
One other thing that I think is quite possible, and strength of a decentralized web, is provenance. So in fact, being able to establish the validity of something, being able to establish the goal of something. So if this is coming from a particular site, you understand it, or what's the probability of it being true, etc. I think an expansion of those sort of ideas is really something that can play that role.
If I were Disney and I made a theme park and I made a ride, right, or a playground that encouraged people to sling racial epithets at each other or misogynistic comments across the across the ride, that would be illegal, right?
Well,
because you're encouraging hate. Okay.
The idea.
All right, wait.
Okay,
Follow me.
All right.
That would not be allowed societally. If Disneyland Park had a ride that said, "Hey, everybody, get in here and scream at each other and say really horrible things to each other," right? You both commonsensically and from a moral standpoint, that's not allowed. We do allow that, unfortunately, in the digital playgrounds that many developers set up. And yeah, that is the big scary, right? And yeah, would you consider it censorship? I don't know, but the bottom line is we are on a slippery slope with that kind of stuff going on.
We not only allow it in the digital playgrounds, we allow it in the surrounding community spaces, and we allow it on our major social media platforms. You know, I don't know if anybody else in this room has experienced harassment on Twitter. Anybody?
So what was the question?
Harassment on Twitter.
Have you been harassed?
Harassment on Twitter? Did you report it?
Yeah.
What happened?
Went into the ether.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So even when there are policies in place, if a platform does not have the will, which is often a business decision, to enforce it, those policies are irrelevant.
I kind of subscribe to this notion that the road to hell is paved with good intentions,
Sure.
right? And, you know, who would have thought that the internet would have led to Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, right? You know, there is some good intentions in creating the internet, and look what we wound up with. And so I like these, you know, notes of caution, like Kurt Vonnegut's quote, that we are who we pretend to be, so we must be careful about who we pretend to be. You know, you could be very well intentioned and try to solve Jen's problem of emotional connection, but by creating, you know, artificial intelligence people to be companions for people who don't have any friends. Like for all the lonely people out there, it seems like a great idea. But what if you wind up with the Terminator instead, right? So, you know, technology has this way of being very unpredictable as far as like, you know, what are the consequences
Well,
of
I have no doubt that Facebook had great intentions to start off with, but somehow they got lost along the way.
Oh, I don't think they had that many great intentions.
No, Mark Zuckerberg wanted to get a date for the weekend. Okay, that was basically it. But now the chickens are coming home to roost, as they say. It's a good Southern expression for it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Or he is who he pretends to be.
Yeah, that could be in that case. I have to think, you know, bringing people together is not bad. Facebook is not bad. Your 70 or 75 or 80-year-old aunt, you know, that might be an important part of her social interaction. So the concept is not bad. It's just somehow it's allowed itself to get abused.
Yeah, Facebook's concept of using real names seemed like a great idea to hide all of the problems of anonymity, but then it allowed us to have our privacy invaded as well, right? So
It's really nothing new. Every major technology along the line has been abused in some form or another from where it was actually intended.
So you've got...
Yeah, actually, I have a question.
Okay.
First, a remark. Bill, you hit the nail on the head in more ways than I think you realize when you remarked about accessibility and how each panelist represented an element of accessibility, including yourself, by the way. You didn't give yourself credit. Cloud, client, tools, proof. Okay, I'm going to call you proof, Bibo, because your work with the World Wide Web is indeed proof of an industry getting together and really changing the world. And actually, we should give a round of applause to Bibo White, in addition to our other panelists, because I'm not sure people realize who Bibo White is. He's not just the first webmaster, but he was the pioneer of the World Wide Web we all take for granted, or not one of the pioneers that we all take for granted. So please, give him a round of applause, because he deserves it.
I'll pay you at the
And finally, Bill, and it's only because of the order of the speakers, but your platform, right? So, so Bibo, speaking as an individual with experience, that, you know, what I recall from web history is it started as a very rudimentary thing. What are your thoughts with the ecosystem literally surrounding you? What are your thoughts on what needs to happen for this next computing era to happen? And I know you've been here since the morning, so you've heard the presentations, you've heard what the industry is working to achieve. In your opinion, what needs to happen to, you know, for that next era to happen?
Well, I was very pleased to see the presentation by Kronos, because certainly one thing that happened in the early days of the web was, basically wild development without any adult leadership, without any standards. And I think that certainly has led to a lot of its problems. And also combined with the fact that it was pretty naive in the sense that people had great aspirations about how it could be used and didn't think about the ugly sides. I don't think anyone would have ever dreamt about cyberbullying on the web or even security issues on the web. So I think it's a case in point where it's saying is that, you basically do have to, even though it seems like a good idea and you really want to, as the old FOMO thing about fear of missing out, but you do have to tread quite carefully in terms of development. Otherwise, I think the web is a great example of how something can get totally out of hand.
I want to add to that because I think there are people who would have thought about cyberbullying on the web. Every woman who has ever been wolf whistled at as she walks down the street could have told you what would happen in a chat room. Every person who has had a racial epithet yelled at them as they walk down the street could have told you what would happen in a chat room. And I think one of the fundamental flaws in our industry and in our community is that we are not diverse, that we do not have people who have that diversity of experiences at the table and really making a point, particularly in the development of new technologies like AI, that, we do know that this is going to happen because we live it. And I think that's something that we all need to do better because otherwise we will just be repeating the same mistakes.
Right.
I think that there's a good point to be made there about how you can't see what is around you if you're actually inside a bubble, right? And we have this all the time in Silicon Valley. We have all these great bubbles. We have an esports bubble right now, and it seems like it's going to be the next great thing, and we're all going to make billions of dollars from it. But when that bubble pops, then you sort of then at that point realize in hindsight, what was happening. My favorite analogy on that point was all of the war correspondents in the Vietnam War in Saigon or in Vietnam. They all thought we were losing the war, and they would file dispatches to their editors in the United States saying that. And then in Washington, the editors would go talk to the Pentagon and say, "Hey, we're fact-checking this. What do you think of this?" And they say, "Oh no, it's wrong. We're winning the war, right?" And so they would publish stories about how we're winning the war, right? And then so, they didn't realize, what they couldn't see, I guess, being where they were. They were in their own kind of bubble, and there were consequences for that. Such a downer. Do we have anything happy to talk about?
I will say I think the web has a bright future, okay? It definitely does. It is going through a midlife crisis now, but I think a lot of people are committed to it. So I am very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that it's going to continue to be a defining force.
I'll add to that as well. I think people are realizing that giving away your data for little tidbits, you're going to find out, oh, who am I? And then you give away that, and then the genie's out the bottle, and now people are realizing the ramifications of being free and easy with it. And now people are going, okay, how do I get that genie back in the bottle and take more ownership? And that comes back to decentralized and whatever else, so that you then control who has it, who does it, who monetizes it, rather than just going and saying, somebody shakes a cat toy at you and you go and say, oh yes, take away my data, that's fine.
So I talked about using technology to build emotional connection. And I think we do actually do that. I have over 1,000 friends on Facebook, probably too many, but many of them are people that who live on the other side of the planet, literally, or that I haven't seen physically in 20 years, but I feel like we are still friends because I know about Leslie's dog, Moose, and how he's this wonderful, great, old, retired police dog, because I know about my friend Emery being named to the New Zealand Game Developers Association. And so I think it gets back to, are we using technology to build those emotional connections and to make the world a better place? And often, maybe not often enough, but often the answer is yes. And I'm really grateful to live in a world where that is possible.
Now, one thing you have to ask about your kids. You talked about you have a 14-year-old kid. Is the impact that he's what's referred to, or she, I'm sorry.
She, yeah.
As a digital native. They haven't known a world without this. And certainly in the case of whatever future that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't necessarily talk about the next generation, but we talk about the generation that once again already is in it and how we can possibly change their experience. Is that a downer?
I know how to cheer everybody up.
Okay.
We have an open bar. We got some food and we got some great company. So Dean, the Futurists, I want to thank you all for sharing your thoughts today. Let's give everyone a round of applause.
Thanks to the rest of
you guys. Enjoy our evening.